Welcome to Neon Cobra. Let's kick into it. All right, so this starts week 3 of my Azure troubleshooting segment, but we're actually going to focus a little bit internal. We're going to talk about tools, right? So over the last 2 weeks, we've talked about things like looking at your performance monitors and looking at your graphs and metrics alerts. So I want to focus on some specific tools that you can use to just troubleshoot maybe some of the behaviors and symptoms we talked about in week 2. We're going to focus just purely on inside the environment. So we're not going to look too much at the actual Azure tools quite yet, because a lot of the times it's very rarely an Azure problem, right? Most of the time it's going to be from within the environment itself, because there are some differences and complexities when you're working in Azure. Not everything is the same, but you will find a lot of similarities. So with that in mind, first, let's talk about some of the CPU tools. And this is something you're going to see likely referenced a couple times, but drive into the performance monitor and task managers, right? If you have reported problems or symptoms, use your sleuthing abilities to understand maybe what's being impacted. Is it session host related? Is it app related? And then dive in and start looking at your task manager. So within task manager itself, there's the performance monitor, which is the enhanced or blown out version. Will provide you very specific information right down to what threads are being hit, what applications might be using it, which user is using that application. And it'll help you kind of dive into maybe isolate where that problem is. If you need to take it a step further, there's a third-party tool called PerfMon, or Performance Monitor, really for short, is the way I've always looked at it. This goes in deep. This will look at everything in the environment. And when there's an event, you can capture almost all the inbound and outbound logs of that specific event and maybe see, like, was it a network call to this resource that maybe locked out and caused a spike in the CPU? So that's how you really get down into it. Now, that's going to be a very, very noisy tool. Right, you're going to find that when you're using this tool, it's going to capture everything. And if you're on a session host with 15 users on it, it's capturing everything. So you try to do it when you have the ability to reproduce the issue or the error. This is a great tool to dive in to find out what in that action you're doing is causing the problems. Now, additionally, there's sysinternals. So this is a Microsoft, I think they co-opted at a later date. This goes into the actual system performance and what's going on in the environment. It'll look at any potential corruptions with the operating system, and it dives in. So it's a very great way to dive into maybe things that might not be directly related, but could be compounding into the overall issues. Additionally, on this one, your event viewer, even though it's not going to necessarily isolate a problem, what it'll do is it'll probably provide you some issues overall in the system that need to be optimized, right? If you have applications that are crashing in the background constantly, maybe not even necessarily related to the problem, that just drains on the resources as it tries to handle and solve for that. We'll see this a lot in virtual desktoping environments when the AVD host wasn't optimized in any way, right? It was deployed off of one of the images that Microsoft provided you. If you're not using products like Nerdio or like the virtual desktop optimization toolkit, which is on GitHub, and as an aside, I'll make sure I link all these in this week's post, right, on the YouTube and the LinkedIn video. But if you're not running these optimizations, sometimes you'll find like the Xbox game bar is crashing on a regular basis in a production environment. Why is it there? But that causes, disk IO, CPU memory, all this stuff. So clean it up, make it as lean as possible. Now, ironically, for memory, the exact same tools are what I recommend, right? Dive in using your performance monitor, resource monitor, look as to what may be causing the issues. When we do this, RAM spikes. Why? Dive in deeper with performance monitoring, and then look at system internals to determine whether the environment itself is working as intended. Networking. So networking, when we talk about what this looks like, symptoms and behaviors, we got timeouts, we got delays, maybe, increase in disk queue depth, spins, such as that. So what we generally want to see is things like your built-in tools, command line, run your ping tests, right? Ping-T, you choose a location. Google is always a popular one. You can even determine like internal servers. How much is the latency? How much ping to this? But take it a step further. Increase the packet size, right? The amount of bytes being passed through by the initial ping test sometimes don't actually put any stress. Well, definitely don't put any stress on the environment. Right? ICMP packets are very, very small. You can do a -L and increase the byte size to your choosing. I usually like start at 1,000 bytes and work my way up from there. And as you start putting pressure on the traffic, you want to check the latency for increases in latency that are maybe well beyond what you're expected, as well as packet loss. Packet loss is huge. Now, additionally, and I've used this tool in the past, ping plotter. So the problem with command prompt is you start it, but you have to be actively watching it for any sort of packet drops. And sometimes you need to track over long periods of time. Ping plotter is a GUI-based version of command line, but allows you to start multiple pings to different locations and monitor for long periods of time. And then it'll pull up the anomalies, right? So if you don't know when these problems happen, maybe start a ping plotter at 8 in the morning and come back at 5 in the afternoon. And then ask your team or your client, hey, when did you experience these problems? And you can go back and try to correlate the issue. Now, again, just because we're seeing packet loss and problems in that environment does not necessarily mean it's a problem with the network. It could be one of the other resources causing constraints and timeouts. So I will link to all these tools below. Let me know what tools you may use. I know RMMs are very popular for tracking this sort of information, but assuming we don't have these tools made available, we're going for a streamline. This is what I usually recommend internal. We'll talk about some Azure specific tools next week. Catch you next time.